It was already known that repeated exposure to conflict and violence, including witnessing and experiencing housing demolition, combined with Israel's siege of Gaza since 2007, is associated with high levels of psychological distress amongst Palestinians. Indeed, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2712 expressed its deep concern that the disruption of access to education has a dramatic impact on children, and that conflict has a lifelong effect on their physical and mental health. This disruption and its dramatic impact on children must be considered in particular and in the context of the number of Palestinian students and educators who've been killed, 4,037 and 209 respectively, and wounded estimated at 7,259. And the number of Palestinian schools having been damaged or destroyed, 352, or 74% of the schools in the whole of Gaza. Medical professionals assess that the health effects on all Palestinian children, women, men, older people, people with disabilities, and people marginalized identities are immense. An emergency coordinator for Médecins Sans Frontières, interviewed on her return from 5 weeks in Gaza, described, "It's even worse in reality than it looks. The amount of suffering is just something incomparable. It's really unbearable. I'm speechless when I try and think of the future of these children. Generations of children who will be handicapped, who will be traumatized. The very children in our mental health program are telling us that they would rather die than continue living in Gaza now."
The extreme levels of bombardment and lack of any safe areas are also causing severe mental trauma in the Palestinian population in Gaza. Even before the latest onslaught, Palestinians in Gaza suffered severe trauma from prior attacks. 80% of Palestinian children experienced higher levels of emotional distress, demonstrating bedwetting, 79%, and reactive mutism, 59%, and engaging in self-harm, 59%, and suicidal thoughts, 55%. 11 weeks of relentless bombardment, displacement, and loss will necessarily have led to a further increase in those figures, particularly for the estimated tens of thousands of Palestinian children who have lost at least one parent, and those who are the sole surviving members of their families. For the families who remain intact or partially intact, quote, "It's about doing everything you can so your child doesn't realise that you've lost control."
There are reports of Israeli forces using white phosphorus in densely populated areas in Gaza. As the World Health Organization describes, even small amounts of white phosphorus can cause deep and severe burns penetrating even through bone and capable of reigniting after initial treatment. There are no functioning hospitals in the north of Gaza in particular, such that injured persons are reduced to waiting to die, unable to seek surgery or medical treatment beyond first aid, dying slow, agonizing deaths from their injuries or from resultant infections.
Large numbers of Palestinian civilians, including children, have reportedly been arrested, blindfolded, forced to undress and remain outside in cold weather, before being forced onto trucks and taken to unknown locations. Medics and first responders in particular have been repeatedly detained by Israeli forces, with many being detained incommunicado at unknown locations. Videos published by Israeli media on Christmas Day appeared to show hundreds of Palestinians rounded up inside Al Yarmouk football stadium in Gaza City, including children, older people, and persons with disabilities, being forced to strip to their underwear in degrading conditions. United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or UN OCHA, reports video footage showing bruises and burns on the bodies of detainees. Images of mutilated and burned corpses, alongside videos of armed attacks by Israeli soldiers, are reportedly circulated in Israel via a Telegram channel called 72 Virgins Uncensored, billed as exclusive content from the Gaza Strip.
Experts are now predicting that more Palestinians in Gaza may die from starvation and disease than airstrikes. And yet Israel is intensifying its bombing campaign, precluding the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance to Palestinians. It is clear that Israel is, through its actions and policies in Gaza, deliberately inflicting on Palestinians conditions of life calculated to bring about their destruction.
On the 9th of October 2023, Israel declared a, quote, complete siege on Gaza, allowing no electricity, no food, no water, and no fuel to enter the Strip. Although the siege has been partially alleviated since then, with some aid trucks being permitted in since the 21st of October 2023, this remains wholly insufficient and well below the pre-October 2023 average of approximately 500 trucks per day.
Moreover, fuel imports permitted since 21 November 2023 are well below the minimum requirements for essential humanitarian operations, meaning that such limited humanitarian aid as is being allowed in cannot easily be moved around Gaza away from entry points.
As the Secretary General has starkly assessed, the level of destruction in Gaza is now so catastrophic that, quote, the conditions for the effective delivery of humanitarian aid no longer exist, but even if sufficient supplies were permitted into Gaza, intense bombardment and hostilities, Israeli restrictions on movement, fuel shortages, and interrupted communications make it impossible for UN agencies and their partners to reach most of the people in need.
Israel has now pushed the Palestinian population in Gaza to the brink of famine, with international agencies warning that the risk of famine is real, World Food Program, and that it is increasing each day. Most of the Palestinian people in Gaza are now starving, with levels of starvation rising daily. The World Health Organization warns that hunger is ravaging Gaza.
As the United Nations Secretary General has stated, 4 out of 5 of the hungriest people anywhere in the world are in Gaza. With Palestinians in Gaza facing the highest levels of acute food insecurity ever classified by the IPC. UNRWA's Commissioner General describes, quote, desperate, hungry, and terrified people who are now stopping aid trucks, taking the food, and eating it right away, close quotes. The World Health Organization has stated that, quote, an unprecedented 93% of the population in Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger, with insufficient food and high levels of malnutrition.
The conditions created by the siege are exacerbated by Israel's continuing strikes on Gaza, including on its bakeries, water facilities, and last remaining operating mill, and its razing of agricultural lands, crops, orchards, and greenhouses. By 16th of November 2023, the food infrastructure in Gaza was already considered no longer functional, given shop and market closures, the lack of essential food items, and the inflated price of the scarce food available. Bread is scarce or non-existent, with food scarcity leading to significant price hikes, and the price of flour increasing by 65% at one stage. Livestock that has not been killed is facing starvation, and crops are damaged or destroyed. Many Palestinians are resorting to foraging due to hunger.
Israel is repeatedly issuing evacuation orders demanding that Palestinian civilians in certain areas of Gaza leave their homes for other areas. The first such order, issued on the 13th of October 2023, demanded that 1.1 million Palestinians living or otherwise present in the north of Gaza, including Gaza City, move to the south of Gaza within a 24-hour window. The International Committee of the Red Cross warned that the evacuation directive, impacting approximately 36% of Gaza's territory, combined with the complete siege of Gaza, was not compatible with international humanitarian law. The World Health Organization warned that it could be tantamount to a death sentence for hospital patients. The evacuation was, however, maintained and has been reissued on a number of occasions, including on the 28th of October 2023, ahead of the Israeli announcement of ground operations in northern Gaza, and again thereafter. Israel has also issued more specific evacuation notices, ordering people in certain parts of Gaza City to evacuate to other parts. Many of those who are unwilling or unable to evacuate are then bombed in their homes.
It is estimated that over 1.9 million Palestinians, out of Gaza's population of 2.3 million people, approximately 85% of the population, have been forced to flee their homes.
Palestinians fleeing the north pursuant to Israel's evacuation orders were urged to move south along Gaza's main traffic artery, Salah ad-Din Road, on certain days during certain designated hours.
However, there were numerous reported instances of shelling along the routes and of other violence by Israeli forces against evacuating Palestinian civilians, including inhuman and degrading treatment, arbitrary arrests, unlawful detention, and killings. Israel has also continued bombing south of Wadi Gaza throughout this time, killing many Palestinians who evacuated, initially prompting many Palestinian families to seek to return north to at least risk being bombed in the civilian surrounding of their homes.
On Christmas Eve itself, the Israeli army bombed Al-Maghazi refugee camp in the middle area, an area to which tens of thousands of Palestinians had fled from the north, killing an estimated 86 people, including many women and children, and injuring many others.
For many Palestinians, the forced evacuation from their homes is necessarily permanent. Israel has now damaged or destroyed an estimated 355,000 Palestinian homes, amounting to 60% of the entire housing stock in Gaza. The extent of the destruction in the north of Gaza in particular has rendered it largely unlivable, with the destruction in the south reaching a similar level. As noted by the Special Rapporteur on the human rights of internally displaced persons, Gaza's housing and civilian infrastructure have been razed to the ground, frustrating any realistic prospects for displaced Gazans to return home, repeating a long history of mass forced displacement of Palestinians by Israel. The forced displacements in Gaza are genocidal, in that they are taking place in circumstances calculated to bring about the physical destruction of Palestinians in Gaza.